Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 17th of July of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. So basically we have passed 50% of the summer military campaign of 2025, and we are entering the final stage of this military campaign. And the most important is that the battle for a major town has begun. And we are talking not about the city of Pokrovsk, neither about the city of Constantinovka, nor about the city of Siversk. We are talking about a very small town in the Pokrovsk agglomeration, and the battle for this town will determine probably the rest of 2025 and probably the entire special military operation. During this video we will talk about this in details. But first let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. And today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the Russians of the group of forces Dnieper managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Kamianske. So this settlement is under complete Russian control. I would like to remind you that during July of 2025 we got a lot of videos, and based on those videos we adjusted the map in this area. So this video, for example, was published on the 8th of July of 2025, and here we can see several soldiers that raised Russian flags in different parts of the settlement. So based on this video, several days ago we adjusted almost the entire Kamianske. And later on the 14th of July, so basically 3 days ago, the Ukrainians published this video where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian soldiers that were clearing the northeastern part of the settlement. So by the 14th of July, I would like to remind you, we colored the settlement of Kamiansk and the complete Russian control. But just today, so 3 days after, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation confirmed this information as well. Currently, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and currently there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Plavny. In the central part of this village, the Ukrainians show fierce resistance. Furthermore, we got very interesting updates from locals, from people, from authorities, from Ukrainian authorities of this part of Ukraine. Russian army preparing full-scale offensive in the Zaporozhye direction. The Russian army forces are moving their reserves, previously stationed near the sea, directly to the front line. And this is the first phase of an offensive that could occur in the second half of July. That was stated by different Ukrainian sources. So, which means that the fall of the settlement of Kamianske is not the end. This is just the beginning of possible Russian full-scale offensive operation in the direction of the city of Zaporozhye, or in the direction of Orekhov or the city of Gulay-Pole. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction and in the Dnipropetrovsk directions. The Russians, after a very short operational pause, resumed their offensive operation in many directions. Currently, the Russians are trying to improve their positions towards the settlement of Yanvarskaya. As you can see, this village is already under complete Russian bombardments. The Russians are trying to destroy as many as possible temporary deployment points of the armored forces of Ukraine, and just to ease the progress on the ground of their stormtroopers, which means that most likely during the upcoming days we're gonna see first updates about the situation around this settlement. Furthermore, the Russians are trying to get the border of Donetsk region in its western part. For these purposes, the Russians still need to take under control Alexandergrad, Andreevo, Klitsova, Zelený Gai, and the settlement of Grushkovsky. And according to different sources, the Russians are currently tasked to do this. So they're improving their positions, trying to make a foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Mokry Yaly bigger. Furthermore, we start receiving also, after a very long operational pause, that the Russians are trying to cut the pocket, to cut this salient between the settlements of Dachny, Novoukrainka, Zelený Kut, and Goryokhova. So we are talking about this pocket. As we can see, the Ukrainians still control this territory, but today we start receiving first reports from very reliable resources that the Russians are about to finish the battle for this territory. The Ukrainians most likely will withdraw their positions in coming days. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk agglomeration. And this is exactly the area I was talking about at the beginning of this video. So the major battle has already begun. And as I told you, this is not the battle for the city of Pokrovsk, nor the battle for the city of Mirnograd, nor Novoekonomichne. We're talking about a very small town to the north of this agglomeration. We're talking about a settlement by the name of Rodynske. So this is the key settlement in this direction. And who controls the settlement controls the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. And as we discussed in the previous videos, and I would like to repeat this once again, if the Russians are able to establish complete control over this settlement, this is going to be the beginning of a complete collapse for Ukrainians, for Ukrainian contingent on the territory of the entire agglomeration. During the previous 24 hours, as you can see, we got lots of icons, lots of updates from this area. But we are not talking about real geolocations and videos where we might see the progress on the ground, because currently both the Russians and the Ukrainians are fighting for this territory. Ukrainians are showing fierce resistance. The Russians are not counting their losses because they understand the value of this pocket, the value of this foothold. And for these purposes, they are ready for everything. But as I told you, during the day, we got some updates that I would like to discuss with you in details. This morning, we got first update from this area, and according to several mappers, the Russians tried or carry out reconnaissance in combat in the direction of the mine by the name of Krasnolimanske. So the Russians this morning, or probably yesterday in the evening, they began, and this morning they finished their first attempts to attack this territory, but all those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainians, and the Russians were forced to fall back for regrouping. Most likely this upcoming night they will make another attempt, or maybe something else. Also during the day, we got several reports from different soldiers on the ground that the situation is critical, that the Russians managed to break through Ukrainian defenses, not just in the northeastern but also in the southwestern direction, that the main supply lines are under complete Russian FPV drone control, that the protection nets that were established by the Ukrainians during the previous months were already destroyed by the Russians. So for example, in this video we can see everything that left from those protection nets, they were destroyed by Russian strikes, by Russian artillery strikes probably, and so on. And the most important is that during this day we got this article. This article was published on the pro-Ukrainian channel, and we're talking not about the military forces, we're talking about just local telegram channels of the villages and towns in this area, and we're talking just about regular people who are still living there. And the Ukrainian, some civilian, made a statement or comment about the situation on the ground, and he said that the Russians are already on the territory of Sukhetske, the Russians are on the territory of mine, and the Russians are on the territory of the ventilation to this mine. So, three objects that were noted in this statement, and let's discuss them in details on this map. So according to locals, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to break through Ukrainian defense and to answer the mine of Krasnolimanske. Currently, there are very heavy clashes, and most likely this mine is already in the gray zone. So let's add some arrows for better understanding. Furthermore, the same source reported that the Russians managed to move even further, and as a result of offensive operation, the Russians entered the Sukhetske locality. So as from this article, it's very difficult to understand whether the author was talking about the village itself was Sukhetske, or the author was talking about this small lake of Sukhetske. But telling the truth, currently it doesn't matter. The Russians managed to improve their positions, and they're much further in the northwestern direction than it was expected by everybody. And the Russians secured the ventilation facility. So when talking about ventilation facility, we're talking about these constructions. So all these three strategical points probably either were captured by the Russians or the Russians answered them, and currently there are very heavy clashes. So when summarizing everything, let's write some lines for better understanding. So currently, according to different sources, the Russians are inside of this breakthrough pocket, and the Russians are planning to move further with the purpose to improve their positions. So it seems that this upcoming night is going to be a vital and decisive night both for the Russians and for the Ukrainians. And I believe that tomorrow in the morning we're going to receive first real updates that will give us the best understanding of the situation. And something tells me that all these strategical points would be secured by the Russians completely. And most likely after the Russians finish the battle for these strategical points, the Russians will continue their offensive operation in the direction of the southern part of Krasny Liman. The Russians will continue their offensive operation from the mine of Krasnoyarsk further in the western direction towards the mine of Rodynske, so we are talking about these facilities, and most likely the Russians will continue improving their positions around the settlement of Sekhetske, also in the northwestern direction, with the purpose to cut supply lines that go in the direction of Rodynske, which means that go in the direction of the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. So it seems that everything is very critical for the Ukrainians. It seems that they're not holding their lines. It seems that the Russians managed to find this key tactic that they use right now and that allow them to improve their positions so significantly. Now let's move further. So the Pokrovsk agglomeration is not the only area where the Russians continue their offensive. Another important thing that I would like to point to your attention. So the Russians are advancing and have almost complete superiority on the ground, but today there was another video published by the Russians that surprised me most of all. We are talking about the settlement of Dobropolye. So, for example, Ukrainians call this direction the Dobropolye direction. And in this video we can see how Russians with FPV drones managed to ambush trains that arrived on the territory of Dobropolye, most likely with arms, weapons and maybe with manpower. The Russians ambushed these trains and they attacked this railway station with significant number of drones. The Russians managed to destroy lots of trains, and here we can see exactly this ambush. So lots of attacks, lots of explosions were recorded, and during this video we can see how several trains were completely destroyed, and not just trains but also the railways. Currently Dobropolye is blocked, and now Ukrainians will suffer huge problems with logistics, because now they need to unload all their trains much further in the northern direction, and then to bring reinforcements, arms and weapons, probably using just trucks, maybe cars or vehicles, which obviously will be very expensive and very long. So, as I told you, this is not the only direction of Russian offensive. Today the Russians shown us probably big intensivity of fightings to the north of N32 road. This video was published by the Russians, and here we can see how Russians were attacking every single square kilometer to the north of road N32, and these attacks have a reason. The Russians, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, today reported that they managed to secure the village of Popiv. Based on the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, we have adjusted the map in this area. So, for example, this is the situation by the end of the 16th of July of 2025. The village of Popiv was used to be considered as a gray zone or contested area, most of its territory, and today we colored the entire village under complete Russian control, which means that currently the Russians are attacking already the village of Poltavka and are trying to advance in the direction of Volodymyrovka along this road. So the Russians will try to improve their positions, and it seems that it's not just an attempt to improve their positions along N32 road. It seems that the Russians are about to begin another, let's say, major offensive, but this time deep inside of the territory of Ukraine towards the settlement of Drushkovka, with the purpose to encircle the city of Constantinovka, which obviously the Russians are not going to storm in front. They will try to outflank it, as they're doing right now with the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Now let's talk about the Konstantinovka area. During the previous 24 hours we haven't received a lot, just the most important probably video is coming from the settlement of Pritiechino. I would like to remind you that several days ago the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the village of Pritiechino was secured by the Russians, but without any proofs. The Russians haven't shown us any video or something like this, and today Ukrainians shown us a video where we can see the Russian flag raised in the central part that was attacked by Ukrainian FPV drone. So the Ukrainians are saying that this Russian flag was also established by a drone And in this video we can see how another, but this time Ukrainian drone was attacking the same flag. So as for now it's very difficult to say. We have the video with the Russian flag, so I think that we need to wait a bit, because as for me, I'm not sure that Ukrainians are saying the truth that the flag was established by a drone. We don't have proofs of this. So let's wait, but this is very important, because once again the Minister of Defense reported control over this territory, but without any proofs. Now let's talk about the Sivas direction, and it seems that the Russians are about to begin another offensive operation, this time most likely in the direction of the village of Serebryanka. This video was published today, and we can see that this is not just a single artillery strike or FPV drone attack. The Russians are trying to reduce the village of Serebryanka till ruins, which means that most likely the Russians are about to begin their major offensive operation, with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back completely from the settlement of Serebryanka and to shorten the distance to the city of Siversk itself. The Ukrainians understand that if they lose the village of Serebryanka, most likely they will lose the city of Siversk. It's just going to be a matter of days. Now let's talk about the northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast. We have changes. The most interesting changes are coming from the city of Volchansk. Today, Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians managed to secure both the western part of the city and the forest, this one. And today, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the settlement of Dihtiarne was also secured by the Russians. So based on this report, we have adjusted the most northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast and Ukraine itself. So now it's interesting to see whether the Russians are going to move further deep inside of the territory of Kharkiv Oblast, or they are going to stop. It seems that they will continue our offensive, and it seems that this offensive in Dihtiarne is a part of a global offensive in the area of the city of Volchansk. Now let's talk about the Sumi direction. The Ukrainians continue their attempts to establish complete control over the settlement of Kondratovka, but the Russians show fierce resistance. Furthermore, the Russians are bombing and attacking positions of Ukrainians with aviation. The Ukrainians, as you can see according to this video, suffer huge losses. So Ukrainians still haven't managed to secure the village and to restore control over it. But the Russians, from their side, according to different mappers, secured almost completely the southern part of Yunakivka. By the end of the 17th of July of 2025, the Russians secured around 70% of the settlement, and the Russians continue their offensive. It seems that in coming days, the Russians will announce complete control over this territory, and then we will make complete adjustment. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.